Good afternoon and welcome to this very practical session, Data Analytics in Excel. It is so good to see so many of you already in attendance, and there's more coming through as we speak. My name is Daniel Cairns and I'm the Head of Enrolments here at Fourth Rev. In partnership with LSE Online, we deliver the Data Analytics Career Accelerator, but today is a practical session for the betterment of your good selves and the application of skills in the real world. So very quickly, we'll invite you to be introduced to our special guests and facilitators for the session. I'm going to host a separate session at the end for those that would like some more information about the program. Just some very quick housekeeping. It's brilliant that you're introducing yourself in the chat function. During the practical session, though, we are going to utilise the Q&A function at the bottom there. And I would ask that if you post a question regarding a technical aspect of the presentation, just tag it with technical first. If it's a course-related question, mention course or something, and we'll get to them later, and feel free to upvote others that are posting questions too. With such a large volume of people in attendance, we're going to do our best to get to as many questions as we can, both during and following the event, but we can't promise to get to them all. However, we are staffed also to answer questions live in that Q&A function, as well as during the session as well. It is brilliant to see so many of you and from so many different parts of the world as well. It is going to be my pleasure also to engage with you a little bit more later on, but as we're short of time and as we want to give you maximum value as a part of our process of delivering these type of events for learners such as yourself and interested people, I'm now going to hand over immediately and ask Andre and Nora to introduce themselves to the very large audience. Andre, welcome. If you could introduce yourself. Actually, we might go ladies first. How about that, Nora? Sorry, Andre. If you could introduce yourself, Nora.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. Hi, everyone. My name is Nora Wolf. I'm one of the facilitators on the Data Analytics Career Accelerator. I have been working in the data space for over 20 years, and I just love seeing numbers come to life and actually make that a reality. In terms of the Career Accelerator itself, it's really excellent to see how we start with individuals that have an interest in data and graduate as data analysts with a lot of technical skills. So welcome to this session, and I'm going to hand you over to Andre, who will be taking you through this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. I can't wait to demonstrate some of the career outcomes that people have had in the second half of the session. Andre, over to you for facilitation and introduction as well. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Daniel. Andre Voges, similar to Nora, working with Fourth Rev for the last 2 and a bit years. Maybe just some background that might make more sense for some of you. Started with academic degree in cellular and molecular biology, so scientific side, then moving to engineering, and then also 20+ years in consulting information systems. And there was always this, you know, the methods and techniques, you know what you want to do, you've got the scientific background, but there's always this disconnect. And somewhere along the line became a accidental data scientist and really have a passion for just unlocking that moment of, I get it. So hopefully in this session, it's not a traditional Q&A or not a traditional click here, click there, follow these 10 steps and you're done. It really is about the thinking process. So looking forward to this session. Please feel free to tag us with questions. Let me just, can I share my screen?
Yes, we can, Andre.
Oh, sorry, resume. There we go. Oh, it went to the wrong slide. There we go. So first thing, I think with analytics, it is not a linear process. There's unfortunately no single checklist. There's loads of existing knowledge, good practices, loads of tools. And we don't want to get caught up in discussions of this tool is better than that tool. Everything is fit for purpose, and it's up to you to navigate the environment, to decide what works. And hopefully I'll introduce a couple of thoughts that will get you thinking. And whether you use Excel pivot tables, which is a great tool in my experience, or a different tool, it really is up to you. So the idea, basic introduction to data analysis. What do you do? Why do you do it? What to look out for? A demonstration regarding the process, and in this case I'm using Excel, but you could give me any tool and I'll be fairly comfortable with the tool. The process remains the same. Then there's an opportunity to do a bit of hands-on. If you want to practice, we will share a CSV file that you can download and that you can apply. In the second portion, I have a separate Excel document, and I've created a couple of examples, something that you can take a look at. We don't want to get stuck, especially with a group this size, in terms of typing errors and all of these things you can get, whether it is from large language models or Excel training. The step-by-step guides you can get everywhere, but we also have the complications of different versions of the same software. So Excel 365 does not behave the same as Excel for Windows, Excel for Mac. So there's small items that where you will get stuck. If you understand the logic, if you know what you want to do, it's not an issue. If you expect to follow something as in step 1 to 10, then you might get stuck. And then finally, I'll start with a very brief view from my side on the Career Accelerator, and I will hand it back over to Daniel. Okay. So what does an analyst do? And first one, took an external item. Data analyst is a professional who retrieves, organizes, and analyzes information from various sources to help an organization achieve business goals. Sounds very straightforward. Sounds like you can just do the training and repeat the steps. In practice, it's not. If we start with a business question, the business question needs to be evaluated in the context of the business goals. The party asking the question, the business sponsor, your manager, might not know what is available, might not know what is possible with the data. And it's your responsibility as analyst to also interact with the various parties to help shape the question, to help shape the suggested actions, to propose new items, to make those questions practical. The example that I always use is I get these vague questions of, we want to be more profitable. What does it mean? You have to break it down into the cost elements, into distribution cost, manufacturing cost, whatever is applicable to your specific use case. Then you need to see, do we have data to inform decisions? Can I actually take a look at the data? Is it available or not? After that, you will probably end up with a 5, 10, 20, however many questions. And then you need to start prioritizing. So you'll do a quick data exploration. Does it contain value or not? And then decide where you want to spend your time and effort. If I don't have control over purchasing costs, spending a week analyzing in detail does not serve a purpose. So being pragmatic, being very, well, number one, thorough and complete, but number two, also, can I use this? How will it be used? To who is this important? So the environment as well, given the available infrastructure and processes. And when I talk about infrastructure and resources, it is not just, do we have machines capable of running the analysis? It is, do we have people capable of doing that? Do we have an appetite to do so? Is it someone asking a quick question for interest's sake, or are you deciding whether you're going to sell the business or double the volumes? So the implications of the decisions that are going to be made also makes a significant difference. Then we also look at techniques. So logic, critical thought, statistical tools, your programming techniques, your machine learning algorithms, all of those, and the method. So being methodical. Typically we use a variation of the scientific process, but I'll refer to the analysis process shortly, but there's good practices. So what to keep in mind when collecting, when modeling, when processing data. And I'll tie back to the slide right at the end, but the process remains the same. Whether I use a pen and paper, whether I use Excel, whether I use Python, or at the end of the day, the process doesn't change, but it is how much time you spend on different activities, how you go about. That's the items that change. So again, taking those good practices and deciding what is applicable in my use case, applying that to your organization. So that's extremely important. And then your value proposition is not just a Excel visualization or a specific answer. It is the ability to propose and implement solutions to add value while navigating and managing complexity and ambiguity. So there's a lot of vagueness. There's a lot of answers that's unfortunately, it depends, but it's a really rewarding environment as well. You get to think and you get to be creative in terms of how you apply things. Next up, just taking a step back and looking at the environment. When we think about implementing a new solution, you also have to consider the organization. Is it a very advanced organization? Or are you trying to deliver a model to a Google, Apple, Facebook, or Meta? Or is it a very small startup organization that does not have any capabilities? And the intention, this is a diagram produced by Gartner quite a few years ago already, but understanding where you are in the process. And it's not a description of all capabilities. You'll typically find silos that are more advanced and silos that are less advanced. But what happened? Why did it happen? What will happen? So starting to move into predictive items, and how can we make it happen? So automating items and having an understanding of where your organization is in the process makes it a lot easier to deliver something that will be well received. If I have a very mature organization and I deliver something that is descriptive stats only, they will not be happy. If I try to deliver a very advanced solution, automated chatbot response function to someone that does not have anything, number one, they will not necessarily know how to, well, they won't trust the data. You will have to do a lot of additional work in terms of setting up the environment, creating the data sources. You can expect quite a few additional resources being required as compared to someone who is more advanced that might have data governance processes, databases where the information is stored and processed, teams responsible for specific functions. So there's quite a few things that it's not just about answering the question. I need to consider the environment. I need to understand my audience, manage expectations, reporting versus analysis as well. We'll get to that shortly in data cleaning. But one of the questions that we typically get early in the process, how much data cleaning should I do? Well, it depends on the question that you're trying to answer. If I am doing financial reporting, the requirement is 100% accuracy. All transactions must be present. Everything must adhere to the specified standards. If I am building a sentiment analysis model to see how customers respond on Twitter to our latest product launch, I don't necessarily care about the data. So there I'm interested in good enough. So depending on the question itself, you will change the way that you do things, those different steps that will get back to you. Again, appropriate use of tools and resources, going back to analysis versus reporting. We typically see the data scientist, the senior analyst being asked to do everything because everyone in the organization trusts the output, trusts the judgment. But you only have time to do so many things. So pushing back and saying, this is not something that is suitable for advanced analysis, data science. Knowing where to interact with existing processes is where you save a lot of time, a lot of money, and you actually get the work that you are supposed to be doing done. And then the unpacking of business questions. I mentioned the horrible, vague questions of being more profitable, or what should we do next? The value that you will be adding is not necessarily in your ability to write code, in your ability to apply statistical techniques. It is in the interpretation and in terms of the translation to business value. I observe this, I interpret it as, I communicate with the relevant stakeholders, and I suggest a specific action that we can implement. If you don't do that last portion, the specifics of, or the output of whatever calculation you were doing is essentially meaningless. So it is the ability to practice, the ability to apply the insights is really where you will be adding value. So just looking at the bottom, it's the same process that we typically go through, starting with a business question, explore the data, and then provide a solution or insight. The details of that will change depending on business question, environment, context, all of that. Thank you. I see the comment regarding the source. I believe the link has been lost. It was in the original. We will add it back. It was from Gartner itself. So you can just look for the data maturity model from Gartner, but we will include it in the slide deck as well. Okay, getting back to the data analysis process. Slightly larger view, define the questions, collect the data, clean and explore, analyze, visualize and share, and embrace failure. Sounds simple enough. With all the lovely tools that we have at our disposal, why should I learn a programming language? Why can't I automate things? Again, external article from Forbes. If we look at the two green ones, cleaning and organizing data at 60%, collecting data sets at 19%. So essentially 80% of your time working in this little circle that we've got here. And if we think about something like duplicates, depending on the question, I would interpret duplicates differently. If we think about, I go to the shop, I purchase a loaf of bread. This afternoon, I realize I forgot it outside or gave it away, whatever the case might be. I go back to the same shop. If they have a well-designed system, there will be unique transactions, timestamps, all of that. If it was written on a piece of paper, it is simply Andre, one loaf of bread at whatever price. So all of those records get captured. When we then have a summarized list of all the transactions of the day, if I don't have additional information, I cannot reliably determine whether that record is a duplicate or not. So in some cases, it doesn't matter. If I'm asking who were the unique customers of the day, remove the second record, I don't care. What was the number of different products that we purchased? Again, I don't care. If we ask the question, how many units of the specific item was sold, then I do care. So even though it's a very simple example, that's the type of thing where there's a lot of value in terms of understanding the process and not automating the process, because it is in really working with the data that you realize how the business captures data, how it gets processed, how it gets stored. And you can, in some cases, push back and make changes. In other cases, you can't. But if you skip that step, if you simply point your data set and say, here you go, large language model, please create a model to do something, it will not know how to deal with those specific items. And again, in terms of the course itself, we do a lot of work of exploring those different permutations, giving you pointers regarding what to watch out for. I'll demonstrate the duplicates very briefly as well. Just checking quickly. Yeah, I'm not going to go into data quality, typically validity, accuracy, completeness, consistency, uniqueness, timeliness. So there's a lot of items that we can apply in terms of good practices. But as I mentioned on the previous slide, how we would go about that for a financial reporting use case versus a analysis use case is very different. And even within analysis, there are quite a few different variations regarding how thorough you have to be. And I think something to keep in mind, or something that's a good starting point, is the concept of non-destructive cleaning. So when you clean something, don't lose track of the original. As soon as you've changed the value, can you get back to the original? I see that very often where, oh, this value is not correct, and we change it to something else. And then a question comes up at a later point, what was the original? I don't know. So make sure that you always introduce additional columns, make sure that you document as far as possible, and that should save you a lot of time and frustration. Very briefly, communicating your insights. I've introduced this slightly earlier as well, but think very carefully about the message that you're trying to convey. If I am talking to my CFO, I talk in terms of currency. What is the financial impact? If I talk to my manufacturing manager, I will talk in terms of number of units produced, active lines, efficiencies. The same concept can be translated into different things. So as you explore the data, what is important to that person? How can I position the information in such a way that they will want to use it? So with data, if you are lucky, you are working in an environment where it is, let's call it relatively modern, where everyone is aware of the value, the power of data. In many cases, we work for legacy organizations where they've got 100 years of history and the decisions are made by the person with the highest or biggest paycheck. And there's a lot of soft skills involved as well. Rather than saying, you are wrong, you have to do ABC, if you can present something where the person can come to an insight on their own. Oh, I see what's happening in that data set. That makes a significant difference. In terms of visualizations, just a quick mention, there's exploratory visualization and there's explanatory. Exploratory is where we try to identify patterns. Many of the items, especially larger data sets, it's very difficult to spot the outliers, to spot changes, to spot patterns, seasonal patterns, for example. If you just look at the data, if you use visualizations, you can see something that's happening, what's happening there, and take that even further. The example of really poor visualization on the site that I've got here, in some cases it is intentionally misleading. In other cases, it is simply not adhering to good practices. But the top visualization, it looks like the first one is 3 or 4 times larger than the second one. It is not labeled properly. We can't see whether it's months, values. So the top one, very easy to take out of context. The bottom one, it's very easy to see that there is a slight difference in behavior. For those in the industry or in whatever industry this is from, you will also know that number of days in the month. So this seems to be a fairly standard pattern. I don't see any specific issues with the pattern. But if I just had a look at the top image, my conclusion would be quite different. Also keep in mind your target audience might not have the same level of involvement with the data as you have. So just in terms of clearly explaining, clearly articulating yourself in terms of this is what I did, this is why I did that, and these are the insights. Different people might look at different places on the same graph. So when you communicate, choose appropriate tools, choose something that works for the specific audience, business, technical. Make sure that you communicate the insights that are relevant to them. Make sure that you document your assumptions. We'll get back to assumptions on the demo as well, but you can't, metadata is never perfect. There's always additional questions. You can't go back and ask questions all the time. But if you are able to say, clearly document, I assume this to be true, I assume that to be true, it allows you to continue. And when you then have questions, you can go back and you can adjust that. So just getting in that habit of really applying yourself, learning what you can about the industry, making sensible assumptions, and documenting them clearly enough that they don't get lost in the detail. We don't want a threshold to be hidden somewhere in a formula that no one knows about. Why did we decide on a value of 2? And I'll get back to 2. Risks and mitigating actions. If I use an external data source, I don't know whether it will be available. I don't know how frequently it's updated. Is it still valuable? Yes, I want to use it, but make sure that you communicate those risks. Don't create the expectation that it will be available, it will be updated, and then you're stuck. Observations and insights, again, being specific. Different people looking at different places on the same graph, coming to different conclusions. So lead them, make sure that it is very clear, very succinct. Recommended actions and expected impact. Why should the business care? Again, coming back to both soft skills and communication skills, and then future opportunities, whether that's technical, whether that's next steps. Coming back to that, dealing with complexity and ambiguity. I understand you want a fully automated chatbot, but step 1 is this, step 2 is that, step 3 is that. Make it tangible. That's how you really add value to the organization and the environment. Final item, I am running slightly late, but focusing on business value. Again, work on things that matter. We spoke about embracing failure earlier on. I don't want Nora to work on the same thing that I spent the last 2 weeks and then coming to the conclusion it doesn't work. So if you don't document those, it leads to a lot of waste. So in terms of teamwork, make sure that you share your learnings, make sure that you've got processes in place to not waste resources. One of the easiest items to use to prioritize items. Does it align with the business goals and values? Do we expect an impact on the business? If the answer is yes, proceed. If the answer is no, be very careful. Where should you be spending your time? Whether that's your own personal time or that of your department or resources in your department, very useful in terms of deciding where to spend time. Okay, now we get to the Excel portion. Again, I've got define the business question, collect the data, clean, analyze model, visualize and share, and embrace failure. The same items we had previously. In terms of defining the item, not going to continue on that, but business context, root cause, can I unpack the item? Can I make it more practical? What are the available resources? Collecting the data, that might be, in this case, a CSV file, and hopefully that will be shared with you. And then it can be internal databases. If you are lucky enough, very good source of data, typically stable, typically maintained by someone else. Slightly lower is other internal data where it is a person responsible, so living on someone's personal server, personal computer, but at least that's an internal item. I can ask Nora, have you updated that sheet recently? When can I expect that? And I can use that. As soon as I start looking at outside data sources, however, introducing risk. So it doesn't take as long to collect, but I have the option of very quickly getting an idea whether something will work or not. Impact of weather on ice cream sales, to use the overused example. Where do I get weather data? So if I just ask the question to determine is it possible or not, I don't really care about the data quality. I just want to prove the principle. However, if I am going to embed that in a production process, I need to mitigate those risks. Analyze and model, visualize and embrace. I think maybe just on the analyze again, in this case, we're using Excel. I use pivot tables extensively because it's very quick to get different perspectives. in many other cases, you would use Python or SAS, any of the advanced tools, whatever's available in your organization. So don't restrict yourself. It is about creativity as well. It's about getting to a appropriate answer for the specific question. Okay, just grabbing my Excel sheet. Oh, let's start with the document itself. So the CSV file that you will have hopefully received is a .csv file. First thing that I would typically do is use a text editor, and this is going to be very small, but just the principle. Excel is very helpful. It's a great tool because it's available everywhere. It's a horrible tool because it's available everywhere. Different ways of using the same tool. So be careful of differences, as we mentioned, per platform, differences in terms of how people use that, but also things like currency recognition, date recognition. My computer might be set up different from the rest of you. Using a text editor to see whether what I see in Excel matches what is in the original file is a very useful trick. The easiest way to get to that sorry, I'm just checking on the CSV file. Nora, will you please just follow up with Sam? Thank you. The easiest way, there's multiple ways of importing. I prefer the open with Excel. Reason for that is it is probably the most predictable in terms of behavior. However, with different file formats originating from different systems, there might be issues. Again, I can check that in terms of the behavior with my text editor. I can see that it is recognized correctly. If I import a CSV file, the formatting does not allow you to store different fonts, formulas, formatting options. So the first thing that you would typically have to do is do a save as, and I'm just going to do temp. Oh, apologies, that's my mistake. Save as. I did not change the Excel type to a workbook. So a workbook will allow me to save additional features. The second way would be to go to your data tab and get data. You can use Power Query, you can connect to databases. I'm just using the from text option, and I select exactly the same file. Here's my CSV. That one. Get data. And now I get a wizard where I've got the option to change the file origin. Is it fixed with or delimited by a specific character? So in this case, if I just look at the data, I can see that it's definitely not fixed with. Many systems produce fixed with output items. I use delimited. Tab is obviously not working. In the bottom here, I can see it doesn't recognize the different columns. If I then change it to comma or whatever, pipe, semicolon, whatever you're using, I can also change the different date formats. There's quite a few different things that we can do. I'm just leaving everything as is for now. And now it asks me where I want this data to be imported, and I click on import, and there I've got exactly the same data set that I obtained using the open with. Okay, so this is the getting the data into your system. For the demo itself, I created a workbook that you don't have to watch me type slowly and make mistakes. And there's a couple of questions that we want to answer. I think the first one, duplicate discussion. I mentioned that earlier, so I think just demonstrating a duplicate. This data set does not have a duplicate. And while There are great functions in terms of Excel where I can say, let's go to home, conditional formatting, and I can say check for duplicate values. The problem with this approach is that it checks in a specific column. It does not check across a row. From an analytic point of view, we're typically interested in rows itself. So I can undo that. And again, if you know what the function is, it's easy enough to get help, whether that is Stack Overflow, searching on the internet, using tutorials. I'm just then demonstrating the principle. A creative approach that I would typically take is I would use a combination of concatenation and the same conditional formatting that we had earlier. So in this case, I created a new column right at the end. I said concat, we can see, concatenate everything in the row and place it in a single cell. So as soon as I've done that, I can create that same conditional formatting. So again, just going back to conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, duplicate values. So then I can use it on a single column. It will highlight where the issues are. As you'll see in the notes at the top, this row have been duplicated in 2 places to demonstrate the principle. So it's right at the top here. It is also in the bottom here. So creativity is really, I think, what will help you. Trying to follow a specific procedure, the demonstration, the tutorial that you will see will not have the same values, will not have the same columns. So think about what you want to achieve and then try to find a way to that. And again, just mentioning that there are typical, well, quite a few different approaches. So you can't say this is right or wrong. Some things are more efficient than others, but there are typically multiple ways of solving the same problem. When we start looking at or evaluating recommendations to the business, it becomes even worse because there's multiple different things, and that complexity, uncertainty, ambiguity that you will have to deal with. In most cases, there will not be a person that can tell you this is right or wrong. So you will have to deal with a lot of uncertainty, trust the data, but also learn what you can from the organization. What do we see elsewhere? What do we expect? If I can test the data on myself, financial data, telco data, I know that I made 5 calls. Do I see 5 calls in the data set? That's all the tricks and items that you will learn to have more confidence in terms of the analysis that you perform. Okay, going back to the business question, how do we generate, or where do we generate the most money based on attendance multiplied by cost? If I just go back to my, apologies, to my define the business question section here, some of the questions that I might ask, well, okay, we've taken a look at the data. Well, I haven't shown it to you in detail. Let's do that quickly. So we've got a class, we've got a level. If I look at that, it seems to be a grouping of the type of class. I've got a venue, number of enrollments, attendance, instructor, day, time, duration, advanced bookings, yes or not applicable or no, and then a cost. The cost I can see is not populated everywhere. I can also see that it looks like a dollar amount, but from the formatting, I would expect the number to be right aligned. It's not, so it is likely to be recognized as text. So going back, well, where do we generate the most money? What does that mean? Is the question in terms of activity group? Is the question venue, instructor, advanced students will, well, advanced cases, you will also start phrasing the question as the money generated per hour. So some of the activities are shorter than others. So there's quite a few different ways to approach this. I'll demonstrate some of the pivot table items now. Just a mention as well for question 2, I've got some additional items for the business. Also, in this case, supplied a, let's call it a grouping. Working with the items, you'll see very quickly, if you have too much information, it's very difficult to display that visually. So introducing groupings is one way to simplify the output. The items that I created here, and for that matter, this whole document, is for demonstration purposes. So it's not intended to be a final solution. It's not intended to be a fully documented item. It's really just to demonstrate a couple of principles to you. So group 1, dance, group 2, other. The first group, you'll see that there's a bit more options. In the second group, it is a simplified group. Whether that's right or wrong, it just demonstrates the principle of how to apply groupings. So I mentioned non-destructive cleaning. The first thing that I would do is I would say move or copy, and I would create a new sheet, decide where I want it, and any changes that I make, I always know that I can get back to the original one. A different way of doing that would be to create a new column where we derive something, and we would add that as a separate column. Make sure that it is clear which are the ones that you created, which are the ones that existed previously. In terms of the calculations, I'll just jump to my item because we are running slightly late. A couple of things that I have done to the previous one. Instead of doing a Control F or find and replace, I can go and replace all the classes with items from the groupings. However, that's a manual process. That's something that's difficult to repeat. If I use a VLOOKUP, it is as simple as saying, take this value, go to our overview sheet, that list that I had on the first page, and look up the value, return the second column. It must be false. Well, false is it must be an exact match. And I want to do the same for the second group. Something else is, in terms of that sense checks, adding quick, what's the minimum, what's the maximum, what is the average values of specific items? Does it make sense? Do I have an age of 150? Do I have values that doesn't make sense? So attendance versus enrollments, there are different expectations. And I see here 200%. So, well, does the business know that? Is that what they anticipate? Should we put mechanisms in place to prevent that? In terms of cleaning I can apply groupings where I can say, I introduce a threshold of 20, something that can be changed. If it is higher than that or less than that value, it is low, otherwise it is high. So introducing custom groupings that I'll use in the pivot table. All of these items, you'll see the green items are derived items or calculated values, and the yellow values are items that your end user can change. So if I then go back to the question of where do we generate the most money? If I look at based on attendance, I see that gymnastics is very popular. In terms of my grouping, if I were to include everything, it becomes a much more dense visualization. So that's an example of how to simplify things. Maybe just one step back, if I take that clean data, the pivot table itself, really, you can sort the data. So if someone asks you what's the highest or the lowest, it's very simple to sort the data to use the normal table filtering options. However, answering multiple questions or providing contextual insight is very difficult. So pivot table, I select the data that I'm interested in. I go to insert, pivot table. My wizard asks me what data, where to insert. I say, okay. And I've got my blank pivot table. So let's take a look at per class. So I drag the pivot table field into rows. I can see a list of items. If I want to do a check of which are the activities that are possible, are there spelling errors, are there mistakes? If we want to ask the question, do we have items that belong in multiple groupings? I can simply introduce additional items. So let's take that out first. And I simply want to see the number of enrollments per class per day. So there's my very quick pivot table. Again, depending on the type of item that you're looking at, you might want to evaluate different perspectives. So that's why it's very useful. Text data, difficult to interpret. So maybe let's see what it suggests as a chart. Okay, well, if I just click on the pivot table data, I can see there's a chart. There's quite a few items that it's very dense at the bottom, very difficult to interpret. So let's go back to our pivot table. We introduced the, what did we have? The group as a filter. And if I then click only the eye, both my data and my visualization updates immediately. If I want to see a specific item, let's look at dancer size. If I want to know how, well, let's take yoga, that's a larger number. If I click on this, it automatically returns, double click, apologies. It returns the data that is used in that aggregate. So rather than having to manually group, manually apply sums, if you can use your pivot table as a starting point to explore the data, to this one was the highest one, that's where I want to get more detail. It's a very small data set. Usually you would have much more, but that really makes your life a lot easier. Okay, getting back to the attendance. We've got one view. If I look at the number of people attending the different activities, if I look at the revenue, and in this case, I introduced the grouping 2 that we had on the earlier sheet, and I can see that studio, well, let's collapse that first to make it slightly easier to see. I can see that the totals for the sports hall and the studio is significantly higher than the others. If you want to see more detail, so where should we invest more? Where should we place the coffee trucks, the item that I'm not probably going to get to? What are the activities within that? You can add these items very quickly within a pivot table, and it really depends on what do you see as interesting? What's the biggest? How does it compare to the others? How do you want to sort that in terms of presenting that to your different stakeholders? I think something like this, again, apologies, it's a very poor visualization, but I included this as from a using visualization to explore data. When you get to the point, in this case, I've got the activities and day, and I've got the sum of revenue. That's a very clear outlier in terms of the behavior. So if I just look at and I use conditional formatting and I said, highlight the top 10%, even doing that, it lists a couple of things. It does not jump out at me to say 937 is extremely high compared to everything else. But if I look at the visualization, I see, well, something is happening here. And again, let's click on that 937 and see, well, the revenue is high. And oh, there we go. We've got a cost of, let's change the view. Sorry. The cost of 75. If I then go back to my original data, I can see that, apologies, go to clean. The cost itself in most cases is 2 and 5. So that 75 is very high. That's where you get involved in discussions. Why is there such a big difference? Should we focus only on that? Should we increase other items? So it's not just about having that discussion of or where do we generate the most money. It really is interacting with the data, interacting with the business, and taking it from there. I think the second one, 2 coffee trucks, where do we need to place them? Again, with some of the items that I briefly jumped through, the argument can be made based on gut feel. It can be made based on personal preference of instructors. You can be creative and say, well, certain types of activities might be associated with, or certain times of day might be associated with. But if I take a look at my coffee pivot, the strongest argument that I can probably make is most importantly at the studio and second most important at the sports hall. There's very little argument to be made based on the amount of revenue collected. Potentially you can change that to number of individuals rather than revenue, because it's not really dependent on how much they spend. It really is based on the number of people present. The last one I'm not going to go into, maybe something else just in terms of formulas. I glanced over this very quickly, but when you clean items, I mentioned try to avoid manually typing over something. I don't like $2. I want this to be 2. I want it to be recognized as well. That's not repeatable. If Nora and myself work on the same document, her version will be different than mine. So try to stay away from that. Second option also to be avoided is the find and replace. Try to use a formula. Try to create something that is easy to use, that is repeatable. Next month, when I get the same data, I just apply the formulas to the existing ones. That makes a lot of sense in terms of saving time in future, but also from a consistency point of view. The cleaning one in this case is relatively long. The first question that I asked, if it is blank, then use the default value. So I can override values. We've got a lot of empty values. If it is not blank, then I want to substitute the $sign with nothing, and I want to translate that to a text value. So you can build up your formulas over time. As you see new errors, you can start to improve on the items and improve from there. Okay. Thank you for taking care of all the questions, Nora. I'm not going to go into the question, but I think if you've received the item, I think what would be interesting, what classes and what instructors have the lowest average attendance. And the hint that I'm providing here is based on the absolute numbers and as a percentage of enrollments. So is it something where people subscribe to activity and don't actually attend? Or is it a case of everyone who subscribes attends, but the numbers are still low? There's different arguments, there's different perspectives that you can consider. Finally, just the analytics and Excel, where it fits into the course. Course 1, it's really about talking about the process, the different perspectives, communicating with the business. We introduce tools as well. So we've got the tools in course 1, in the 6 weeks of course 1 is Excel, Tableau, and Postgres. So working with databases, working with visualization, working with Excel. And course 2, we really go deeper into that exploratory analysis process using Python, using Jupyter notebooks. There's a gravity principle where as soon as you start hitting the restrictions with Excel, you start moving to other tools such as Python. And with experience, that keeps on shifting. Course 3, we really look at taking that even further. That's where we look at prediction, introducing some basic machine learning techniques, and also using Python and R. And then that is followed by the employer project. Daniel, do you want to say some more about the wrap-up items?
Well done, firstly. Just waiting for that. Well done, Andre. That was thorough and provided, I think, everyone with a great understanding and overview of what you were demonstrating there. I know there's some questions regarding some other items in the Q&A that we'll get to, but firstly, there will be a recording of this session that will be available. So if people would still like to download the CSV and follow Andre's steps through the process again, you'll certainly be able to do that. And I know that was a question that came up occasionally throughout the chat. Anything else you wanted to touch on, Andre, before I invite people to stick around to learn more about the actual course and the entry criteria and the funding options available and all those other things that I'll touch on?
I see Nora's hand raised. I would defer to her. I have not had the chance to read through all of the questions. I think from my side, it really is about logic. It really is about using the tool. So Nora, I'm not sure. Can you perhaps comment on some of the remaining questions?
Yes, I have a quick one that I'd like you to please answer, Andre, which is which version specifically of Excel were you using for the demo?
So this machine is a Mac. So it is Excel for Mac, the local version. With Excel, really, there's so many different items. Don't get stuck on the items. In some cases, you might have to trick it. You might have to run the function. You'll get an error. Then you'll do an update, and only then the function will become available. But use the tools at your disposal. Google search. How do I do ABC on Excel for Mac? Don't read through instructions and assume everything will be the same everywhere. Hopefully that helps.